we have to talk about the Buddhist no-self view in detail. We've talked about it in the past, but it's been in the context of looking at Buddhist ethics. You know, the motivation for the no-self view, if you like, comes from Buddhist ethics, because the Buddha was mainly interested in, you know, reducing suffering, giving people a better life. He's quite, you know, in many of the dialogues, it's quite clear that metaphysical questions, answering whether there is a self or not, and what is the nature of the self, or whether there is time, he said those questions, you know, are not important. What is important is practical concerns, considerations about how we can live better, how we can reduce suffering. So the motivation for the Buddhist view comes from the Buddhist ethics, you know, the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering, we need to reduce it, we need to get rid of causes. But remember that the Buddhist literature came up as a reaction to the Hindus. So it was the Hindus who forced them to think about these kinds of issues, not only in metaphysics, but also in epistemology. So later on, as time progresses, so I'm talking about, you know, thousands of years, in about 6th century AD, so from the 5th century BC, when the Buddha was alive, to the 6th century AD is when epistemology also came to the fore in Buddhist. So what you get now in terms of the Buddhist canon is all the parts of a philosophical theory. You get ethics, you get metaphysics, and you get epistemology. 3 major parts. You know, there's a bit of political philosophy that comes very, very late in Buddhist thought, but it's not, you know, as I said, these are not the central motivations. You have to keep in mind what's motivating this view is a practical consideration. How can we live better? And not, you know, when I say we live better, not I live better, because according to the Buddhists, there is no I. And we'll talk more about that. Just a bit of a, you know, autobiographical note. Those of you who might have looked at my profile would have known that I work in Buddhist philosophy. And over the years, I've been trying to defend, you know, a very radical version. So I just wanted to tell you this about myself. To think about, you know, if you do more philosophy, if you go into research, this is how you might want to. So I've, you know, for the last 10 years, if you like, thinking about Buddhist philosophy, reading Buddhist philosophy, and defending the no-self doctrine. So the strongest version, I think, to be true to the spirit of Buddhism, to be true to this philosophy, you have to defend the strongest version of the view. What you get in the other literature, so I'm not the only, you know, player in the field, if you like, there are other people in the field, and what you get in most of the other views in the contemporary literature, and, you know, if any of you are interested in reading, I can point you in that direction, but you don't have to for this course, is you get a watered-down version of the no-self view, because, I think, because people try to make it intuitively acceptable. You know, they think if they give you the real view, that's just going to be so unacceptable to people, it's not even worth arguing, it cannot be defended. So what I want to do today is to, you know, focusing on the text, focusing on your readings, get you to think about how counterintuitive the Buddhist view is. I still think it is right, it does have a few problems, but, you know, it can be defended. So that's, you know, kind of been my project, sort of looking at Buddhist philosophy and more at their philosophy of mind, more at their positive doctrine, but holding on to a very strong version of the no-self view, because I think, you know, that's the right way to interpret the text. So most people say this. So this is the standard view, if you like, in the literature, in the contemporary literature on Buddhist philosophy. They say, yes, the Buddhists did not want a separate self, independent of the mental and physical states. So the Buddhists were not denying, when they're denying a self, they are denying a self, a soul substance which is independent of the mind and body. They are not really denying continuity. They are not really denying, continued existence of things. So we can have what they call relatively permanent selves, relatively permanent notions of, mental and physical states existing together. And that bundle, can be called a self because it continues to exist over a period of time. So you get this watered-down version because I think they do not take the Buddhist point seriously that, there is no continuity over time. And, we should look at the text today and tell me what you think. But we'll get to that in a little while. First, we need to, sort of get clear about a very important distinction in Buddhist philosophy, which is the distinction between ultimate truth and conventional truth. And this distinction is important because at the practical level, if there's no selves, how do we make sense of the legal system of punishment? How can I be responsible for my crimes? How can, anyone have moral responsibility? The Buddhists like the notion of karma, so they want moral responsibility. If there's no continuity, how do we make sense of moral responsibility? How do we make sense of karma? So for this reason, the Buddhists have, the distinction between ultimate truth and conventional truth at the conventional level, at the practical or the transactional level at which we function in the world. There is a sense which, we can talk about, there is a sense in which we can talk about persons, but not at the ultimate level. And let me try and explain this distinction by reading some texts. And as you remember, the Buddhist texts are much more fun to read than the Hindu texts in some sense because they go on and on and on with examples. They're not aphoristic. This is dialogues. The Buddha is actually talking to people, giving them examples. And so what you get, is a conversational style in the text rather than, the aphoristic kind of claims that you saw in looking at the Hindu doctrine. Okay, so I'm on page 120, and the section is, there is no ego. So this is a conversation between King Milinda, who was, and he's talking to a Buddhist saint, Bhante Nagasena, and this is how the king, sort of simply starts off. How is your reverence called, Bhante? What is your name? He's just asking the Buddhist, what's your name? How are you called? And the response is a very long one. So see what the saint has to say. Your Majesty, I am called Nagasena. My fellow priests, Your Majesty, address me as Nagasena. But whether parents give one the name Nagasena or Surasena or Virasena, it is nevertheless, Your Majesty, but a way of counting, a term, an appellation, a convenient designation, a mere name. This Nagasena, for there is no ego here to be found. So he's trying to make the point, it's just a way of, making it easy to refer to people around you. So you don't, think of monima as a bundle of, constantly changing mental and physical states. The thing that walked in is not the same monima anymore. For convenience, we stick a label. We stick a label to a person and we call them by a certain name. But just because we have a name or we use the term I to refer to ourselves doesn't mean that, there is something that it latches onto. There is something it designates. There is something in the world that it stands for. So the king is very upset. He says, listen to me. There are 80,000 priests and, the whole assembly is sort of present. There is no ego here to be found. Is it possible So read ego here as a person or a self. Is it possible for pray for me to assent to what he says? So the king is very confused, and he speaks to Nagasena as follows. So Bhante Nagasena, if there is no self or person to be found, who is it then that furnishes you priests with the priestly requisites, robes, food, bedding, medicine, the reliance of the sick? Who is it that makes use of the same? Who is it that keeps the precepts? Who is it that applies himself to meditation? Who is it that realizes the paths, the fruit, the nirvana? Who is it that's working towards it? Who is it that destroys life? Who is it that takes? So he's saying, if there is no person here to be found, who is the agent of the action? Who is the owner of experiences? Who is responsible for karma? Bhante Nagasena, he says, if there is no person here, what then is Nagasena? What does the term Nagasena stand for if there is no person here to be found? So in that case, if there's no person, in that case, there is no merit, no positive karma, there is no demerit, there is no one who does or causes to be done good nor evil. Neither good nor evil deeds can have any fruit or result. That's, how do we make sense of the doctrine of karma if there is no person? If there's no continuing entity, there's no self, how can we to make sense of it? And the king goes on to say, what then is Nagasena? Pray, Bhante, is it the hair of your head, Nagasena? No. Is it the hair of the body? No. Are it nails, teeth, skin, flesh, bones, marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, and the list goes on? Is that Nagasena? No. Is now Bhante form Nagasena? No. Is by form here it means the physical states. Form means physical states, and name, when it's used in this context, it stands for mental states, and the Buddhist name for mental states. So is now Bhante form Nagasena? No, so it's not matter. Is sensation? That's the first mental state. Is perception? No. Are predispositions, instincts that we have acquired, Nagasena? No. Is consciousness? So these are the four mental states that are listed usually as name, or sometimes called the groups. The mental and physical states together are called the groups. And he keeps saying no. Are then all of these put together unitedly, Nagasena? No. Is it something besides that? No. Bhante, although I question you very closely, I failed to discover any Nagasena. Nagasena is a mere empty sound. What Nagasena is there here? Bhante, you speak a falsehood, a lie. There is no Nagasena. How can we make, sense of it? And what the priest offers back, what the saint offers back to the king, is an analogy in response. Your Majesty, you're a delicate prince, an exceedingly delicate prince, and if Your Majesty, you walk in the middle of the day on hot sandy ground and you tread on rough grit and gravel and sand, your feet become sore, your body tired, the mind is oppressed, and the body consciousness suffers. Pray, did you come afoot or riding? Bhante, I do not go afoot. I came in a chariot. Your Majesty, if you came in a chariot, declare to me the chariot. Show me your chariot. And pray, Your Majesty. And then he goes on. Is the pole of the chariot the chariot? Is the axle the chariot? No. Are the wheels the chariot? No. Is the chariot body the chariot? No. Is the banner staff? Is the yoke? And so on it goes on. Are all these things put together the chariot? No. And then the saint says, well, Your Majesty, although I question you very closely, I fail to discover any chariot. The word chariot is a mere empty sound. Your Majesty, you speak a falsehood, a lie. There is no chariot. You are the king of all of India. What are you afraid of? Why do you speak a lie? And so he goes on. I came in a chariot. Where's the chariot? There are all these bits of the chariot put together, but what's the chariot over and above these bits? Just as we look for a person, remember the first part of the conversation was, you know, the parts of the person are not Nagasena. There is something else that the term Nagasena refers to. And the Buddhist is just offering an analogy to say, if that was the case, show me the chariot. Tell me where the chariot is over and above these parts. And he says, Bhante, the king says, I speak no lie. The word chariot is but a way of counting, a term, an appellation, a convenient designation, and a name for all these things put together. Thoroughly well, Your Majesty. Do you understand a chariot? In exactly the same way, in respect of me, Nagasena is just a way of counting, a mere name for all these things put together, but in the absolute sense, in the ultimate sense, there is no Nagasena, there is no ego here to be found. Just a little bit more reading. So you get the basic point? The idea is, you know, when we think of persons, when we think of selves, we think of it as something internal, something over and above mental and physical states. We don't think of our body as being myself. You know, I look in the mirror and I say, you know, I am tall, or, well, I'm not really, I'm fat, or, you know, something. But it's not, you think that, you know, but that's just my body. We have this sense, you know, do you all agree there is this sense of, you know, the person, the name really refers to something else other than just the body? Something else other than this thought or this belief or this pain that I have in the foot? The self is the thing, the owner of these experiences. The person, you know, continues to exist even though thoughts come and go, beliefs change, body parts, you know, cells die and all that. The person, when we use the name Monima, we're pointing to something else other than just this body, other than just this, you know, set of beliefs or something like that. Because these things, you know, we'll all accept, keep changing. But we don't say that monima and this monima and another monima and another monima. We just use the same term. And that suggests that we expect there to be something that continues to exist. So just a little more on page 122 from the text called Vishuddhi Magga, which means the path of realization. Vishuddhi means, you know, sort of the path to purity, if you like. Just as the word chariot is but a mode of expression for axle, wheels, chariot body, and other constituent members placed in a certain relation to each other, but when we come to examine the members one by one, we discover in the absolute sense there is no chariot. And just as the word house, so what you get is further analogies. There is the word house is but a mode of expression for wood and other constituents of a house surrounding space in a certain relation. In the absolute sense, where is the house? You know, if you think about the parts of a house, there's the walls, there's the windows, there's all of these things put together. That's it. There's nothing more to it, you know. But if you point at one bit, do you say, is the window the house? No. Is the door the house? No. Are the walls the house? No. But then it's nothing over and above. And then you get another example, and this is the last one I'll use. Just as the word fist is but a mode of expression. So the word fist is just a mode of expression for the fingers and the thumb in a certain relation, the word, and so on. But when we come to examine the parts one by one, we discover that in the absolute sense, there is no fist. There's nothing. There's no fist over and above the hands and fingers in a certain relation. And so that's the point that the Buddhists want to make. In exactly the same way, the words living entity, ego are but a mode of expression for the presence of the 5 attachment groups. The 5 attachment groups are, matter and mental states, name and form. But when we come to examine the elements of being one by one, we discover in the absolute sense, in the ultimate sense, there is no living entity there to form a basis of figments such as I am or I. In other words, in the absolute sense, there is only name and form. So in the ultimate sense, there is only mental and physical states and bundles of mental and physical states. There is nothing else there to be found that can be the referent of the term I or the referent of the term monema. We find it unsatisfactory that there is just, persons are just reduced to bundles of mental and physical states, but the Buddhist gives you lots of examples. Think about the house, think about the fist, think about the chariot, think about the tree, think about anything. What do you think of these analogies? Do they help make the point? Do you understand now why it's good enough to say that in the ultimate sense, ultimately when we are talking about metaphysical reality, we, just to make our life easier, we refer to someone as Paul, someone as Kelly, someone as Ben, and so on and so forth. And that is just to make, conversation easier. But, have we ever seen anything other than, have we ever come across anything other than mental and physical states, or a bundle of mental and physical states that stands for that person? We don't want to identify the person with the bundle of mental and physical states. We think there is something else. Do these analogies help to make the point, or do you think they're not satisfactory? The fist example, the chariot example, table example, room example, any example you can use. Yeah?
I don't find them satisfactory. So what we're trying to do is just to describe things as bundles of materials. But you can give a definition of what a chariot is beyond what it's made of. I don't know, say, give an Aristotelian definition and just use the ends of the chariot or such a thing that would carry you to places.
What is its function?
Exactly.
Yeah, you can talk about the function of the chariot. Well, the Buddhists will have no problem with that. You can think of, if you like, a pragmatic or a functional use of persons. Why does it make sense to refer to persons with names? Because then it makes it easier to take attendance in class. It makes it easier, to blame someone for what they did. It makes it easier to reward someone for what they did, etc., etc. It just, makes practical life easier. That's why they have the notion of conventional truth. It makes sense to use these categories, but do not start believing that there is something over and above the mental and physical states put together, the ever-changing bundle of mental and physical states put together, that stands for, it's just a way of talking. Just as, we call this fist, we could have called this kissed. Is there a kissed or a fist? Do you think kiss exists? No, you don't. Do you think fist exists? Well, you should say no, they don't. Because it's just a way of referring to this particular bundle of physical stuff in a certain relation to each other, fingers and hand. If I did it that's not a fist. It has to be a certain relation. But, they say there are causal relations, there are special relations that bind together bundles of mental and physical states, and these bundles keep changing. But there's nothing over and above that. Your name is just a label. There's no person here to be found. This room is full of bundles of mental and physical states causally interacting with each other. That's all. There's no persons here. There's nothing special about this bundle. My mental and physical states are interacting with each other, but so are my mental states interacting with your mental states, causing you to think. What's the Buddhist view? Okay, So get it? So there's name and form, mental states and physical states put together by certain causal relations, and that is all there is to the person. The more important thing to realize, what I think lies at the heart or at the root of the denial of persons is when we start thinking in terms of I, or when we start thinking in terms of persons, we start thinking of things that continue to exist, even though the mental and physical states change. We think it's me who's going to get the mark on the assignment. We think it's, the same person who's going to graduate at the end of 3 or 4 years of your degree. That's what you are working for. And they say, metaphysically, this picture is mistaken. It makes life easier for you, in a makes it convenient to continue with our social setup. But there is no truth to it. There is no underlying truth to it. And in fact, what it does, it makes you self-interested, back to the ethical motivation. With this sense of me continuing to exist in the future comes my self-interest. Give up the idea that there is anything that continues to exist in the future. All there is a bundle of physical and mental states continuously changing over time. So another thing that they say, a person lasts as long as a thought lasts. A new thought in your mind, and it's a new bundle. It's a different bundle now. Even in, sitting here for 2 hours, lots of many bundles would have changed hands because thoughts keep coming and going. There's no bundles that, no matter how hard you try, some cells in your body are going to die in the process of this lecture. Neither the mental states nor the physical states are going to remain the same. So the thing that walked in and the thing that's going to walk out are two very different things. And that's all there is at the ultimate level. That's the Buddhist view. And if you ask the question, where does it come from? Where does it go? And they give you this example from the text that, think of it as playing a lute. Where does the sound come from? Well, it is the shape of the lute. It's using your muscles in a certain way, blowing the air into it, so on and so forth. That gives rise to the sound. The sound doesn't come from anywhere. When you stop playing, the sound doesn't go anywhere. It just comes into being on the basis of, physical factors that come together, and then it passes away. So a person is just like that. Given certain factors, mental and physical factors, a person comes into being, and as soon as that bundle changes, and it changes all the time, the person goes out of existence, and there's no point calling it a person anymore. That's what the Buddhist is. Make sure you think that this is only a label. It's only making it convenient to talk about, to exist in a social system. But there's no metaphysical reality to this picture. Any questions? Yeah?
This might be completely wrong. Just going to test it. What would a Buddhist say about, say, a melody, series of notes played into a melody? Would he have to deny that such a melody exists?
Sorry, what exists?
So a melody, a series of notes played by
Yeah.
instrument. Are they just a series of notes, one after the other, or is there such a thing as a melody that exists as a group?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll say why it's a good point is an example used by phenomenologists all the time. If you've heard the name of the philosopher Husserl, that's his example of making sense of consciousness. And he says, when you hear a melody, you do not hear single notes. There is what he calls you retain the previous note, and you have the expectation. He calls it retention and protension. There's the retention of the previous note and the expectation of the note that will come next That's what constitutes hearing a melody. It's not just hearing individual notes. And so Husserl argues experience is like that. Experience is not, experiencing something in the now. Experience, conscious experience itself, hearing a melody, and, similar examples, requires that there be a past and a future, because everything, this is how he puts it. Just as you cannot, this is an example I think that is quite useful in Husserl, just as you cannot see a thing without its background, right? If I ask you to look at that screen, you can only sense an object against the background. They say, you can only sense experiences against a temporal background, a temporal horizon. There's nothing like just the now. And that is, exactly the Buddhist point, that there is just the now. Let me think what to say to, this is something I have thought hard about. Well, I've written on it as well. Here's how the Buddhists explain this. So they think, yes, there's the before and the after. But the before always leaves a causal trace, right? And the thing existing in the moment has the potency to cause something in the future. So what the Buddhists, my sense is, what the Buddhists do is, instead of having, what your point is, that for experience we need time to be spread out like this. Because experience cannot just be in the now, it has much richer content. It seems there is a past and a future. So experience has to be spread out in time. What the Buddhists say to that is, all the content, if you like, can be brought into the present by thinking about, some causal traces of the past are in the present, and some potency to cause the future. So the present is kind of carrying the past, and a way of putting it is pregnant with the future. Or, yes, experience has much more content. That's why they don't think that conscious experience is this one thing. They think lots of things come together, lots of conditions come together to result in a conscious experience. So I think this is the way a Buddhist should deal with it. Say, yes, you're right, listening to a melody suggests as if, there is more on the temporal horizon in the past and the future than just what is in the present. But we can account for that by saying the past does leave a causal trace, It's remembered even soon after it perishes, and it in itself contains the potency for the future. So that's how a Buddhist will respond to it. So they will say, the Buddhists say, mental states are real, conscious experiences are real. What's not real is anything continuing over time. That's what's not real. And that's what the denial of persons, that's what the denial of selves really consists in. But the Buddhists, so let me say a little bit more about, how they think about mental and physical states, about name and form. Mental states, name, and physical states, form, they exist together. How do they come together? What's the relationship between them? And you might ask, what's the relationship between mental states, physical states, and persons? The Buddhists say that question is meaningless because there are no persons. But we can talk about the relationship between mental states and physical states, and this is what they have to say. I think it's on page 125, name and form, again from the Vishuddhimagga. By name are meant the three groups: sensation, perception, and predispositions. And by form, the four elements, of matter, earth, water, fire, and air. Everyone accepted that there were four elements. Why do they name only three? Sensation, perception, and predispositions. Why don't they mention consciousness? Because consciousness comes about in bringing these together. Predispositions, instincts from the past, that's the past influences. Sensations, what you are sensing right now. Perceptions, what you will, sort of see in the future. So, in lots of places, you will see they talk about the 5 elements, or the 5 groups, or the attachment groups. That's what it always means. 4 mental states: perceptions, sensations, predispositions, and consciousness, and form is the name for all the material states. So what's the relationship between them? Section 29b, just after that. Name has no power on its own, nor can it go of its own impulse either to eat or to drink or to utter sounds or to make a movement. So just mental states cannot function on their own. Form also is without power and cannot go on of its own impulse. It has no desire to eat, it has no desire to drink or to utter sounds or to make a movement. But form goes on when supported by name, and name when supported by form. When there is a mental state, a desire to eat or drink or to utter sounds, then matter, the body eats, drinks, utters sounds. So they give an analogy again to clarify the relation. It is as if 2 men, the one blind from birth and the other a cripple, were desirous of going traveling, and the man blind from birth were to say to the cripple as follows: "See here, I'm able to use my legs, but I have no eyes with which to see the rough and the smooth places in the road." And the cripple were to say to the man blind from birth, "See here, I'm able to use my eyes, but I have no legs with which to go forward and back." And then they form a team. The blind person climbs on the shoulders of the blind person climbs on the shoulders. No, the cripple climbs on the shoulders of the blind, and then they go on a trip together. So that's the relationship between the name and form. Who's blind and who's the cripple? Which is blind? Name, mental states? Mental states are going to be the cripple or the blind? Cripple. Mental states are cripple. They can't move anything, so to say. Mental states are the cripple. Physical states are the blind. Matter is blind. An analogy you've, come across in Western texts as well. Matter is blind. It has no force of its own. That chair is blind. Just material things are blind. And that's exactly the analogy that the Buddhists use, but they come together, name and form come together, and, the form gives the name the capacity to act, so to say. The form is the desire, and then if I have a desire, then my body will move accordingly. That's all you need. Remember, this is kind of a response to the Nyaya argument for, you see a chariot moving, and you see it moving, avoiding the bumps on the road, and you think there is an intelligent person, there is an intelligent owner, that's making the chariot move in a certain way, avoiding the bumps, not crashing into the trees, and so on and so forth. What's the response? You don't need anything more than mental states, mental and body states. The mental states can do the guiding. They're not blind. Why do you want to say there needs to be an agent over and above the mental states? In another text, not here, you get this example about think about an agent, think about an action. Where is the need for an agent in the action? What happens when you see a mango? A desire for a mango arises. The desire, on the basis of the desire, you form an intention to get the mango. Intention is another mental state. On the basis of the intention, you move your hand a certain way to get the mango out of the fridge, cut it, and so on and so forth, and you eat it. Where's the agent in all this? There's some mental states that start the process. There's some physical states that carry out that intention. Show me where is the agent, the Buddha says. What are you talking about? There needs to be an agent of action. There is none. Mental states and physical states can come together and do all there is to be done. There are still, lots and lots of questions, and this is why the Buddhist view is counterintuitive. Is there anything else you could think it cannot explain? What do you think this kind of view will not be able to explain? What work does a person do, so to say? The Buddhist is saying there's no work for a person. Yeah?
What about philosophizing?
Not essential to life. Sorry. What about philosophizing? Who is it that does the philosophizing? Any responses on behalf of the Buddhist? Do you need an ego? Do you need a person? Do you need a continuous thing to do the philosophizing? No? Why not?
Because if you've got a mental state that's thinking, and it just causes another one that will take the next step, and you kind of thought process.
Yeah. That's
That's not the way philosophizing works.
Pardon?
That's not the way philosophizing works.
How does it work? Tell me.
You start at one point and you want to get to an answer, and it's not just a wave of different mental states causing each other and crashing randomly until you get to one point. No,
The Buddhist never.
takes different paths and chooses in order to get to an answer. I don't know. I think the Buddhist would be obliged to make an explanation that makes it very, very random.
Why do you think the Buddhist explanation should be random? I mean, they're saying one state causes another. It's not a random, you have this certain thought, you have this question in your head, can I make sense of memory on this view? I struggled hard with this question. Can I make sense of memory on this view? And it took me a few years, that's how slow I am, to make sense of, yes, we can make sense of memory. It's not a random process. It's a causal process. Causal processes are not random. They're saying one mental state causes another. A question arises in your head. You go and investigate possible things. You look at, if you're a scientist, any kind of creative thinking, any kind of philosophizing. You read certain things. You try and think of an answer. You consider certain options. Then you take the most promising option. Why do you select the one that is the most promising option, that you see as the most promising? Because there's, the previous mental states, they leave certain impressions, and that causes you to go in a certain direction. None of us come without assumptions, right? So it's not that philosophizing is, the Buddhists make all thought processes a random process. I think they want to be very, very careful about this. That would make it very hard if it was just a random process. It's a causally determined process, and your past and the kind of knowledge and the kind of background information you have determines what options you come up with, causally determines which path you tend to go down on first to check it out. It's all causally determined. It's not just a random process going here and there. Yeah.
Okay, maybe not random, but at no point are you, like in that description, at no point are you steering the boat. You're just letting, you're letting them overtake you. At no point are you steering and saying, you've got two options and you decide which one. You're simply a consequence of what you've experienced and what you thought before. So another person in the same situation as you would have to think the same thing. Whereas I'd like to think that no matter what your situation, people's thoughts were, you're able to pick something, regardless of the previous state.
Okay, so now you're bringing in the free will question. There needs to be some kind of free will. I need to be a free agent. Any responses to that on behalf of my Buddhist friends here? You know, how is the Buddhist going to explain free will, that I have a choice? It's not just all causally determined, going in a certain direction. The Buddhist does need, you know, some notion of free will without an agent. Can we talk about free will in this picture? Can we talk about why I think in a certain direction? Here's what the Buddhist has to say about it, and this is a question they have considered. You know, when I talked just then, I talked about, you know, on the basis of your desire, you form an intention. On the basis of your intention, your body moves in a certain way to get the mango out of the fridge, to peel it, and to eat it, and so on and so forth. That's a very simple analysis, the Buddhist will say. The real picture, so that's a very simple analysis that we in Western philosophy think about: belief, desire, intention. I believe there's a mango, I have the desire to eat a mango, I open the fridge and get the mango out, blah, blah, blah. That belief, desire, intention is a very simple, simplistic picture. What is really going on, the Buddhist says, is much more complicated at the psychological level. Our behavior, our motivations are constrained by our past. Now, they do not want to say it is completely determined, because we have some control over our mental states. That's the whole point of meditation. The point of meditation is, and the point of, you know, following the Buddhist path, believing the Buddhist is, that you are able to have more control over your mental state. You know, if a desire to eat a mango arises in you, that's just, you know, causally determined, and it arises, you have the if you like, you have the ability to not to, because this is not the proper time, or you should, you know, leave it for your kid sister, or something like that. You know, there might be other considerations. So it's not as if there is one determined path, and, you know, the causal story just drives the whole thing to the end. There's lots of junctures where it can go a different way. You might think, you know, you've had your mango, this belongs to your kid sister. Or you might think, you know, I shouldn't really eat more mangoes, I'm trying to lose weight, or whatever it is, you know, consideration. So it's not such a simple story that a desire arises, you have a certain belief, together you form an intention, and the body moves. There's lots of motivations. There's lots of, the Buddhists, in fact, say there's lots of pre-conscious stuff. You might not even be conscious of things that are motivating you to work in a certain way. It's not, the picture is not as simple. So there is a lot of room for self-control, for choices in the Buddhist picture. Causally determined does not mean there's one flow in the direction in which it's going to go. There's still, you know, intervening. There's other mental states that can intervene. The thought of your sister, or, you know, the thought of losing weight, or something like that, that might step in and stop this process. But that's just another thought. There is no person. The Buddhist point is, there's nothing other than mental states jumping in and deciding what course of action to take. You know, stop giving up this, that there is a person who makes a decision. There is a person who decides what to do. There's a person who's in control. No, meditation is just a mental process to have better control over mental states. That's all there is to it, to make sure that certain kinds of mental states arise. Yeah?
The way, I don't think that's still not free will. You're just talking about a more complex picture that there's more mental states working with each other.
Yeah.
That's if, again, you're not steering both. There's just more rivers coming into one, and there's just more options on what can happen. But
The Buddhists say,
someone has the power of changing it.
well, the Buddhists say that's all there is to. You know, you can train your mind. You can train your mind to make better choices. I mean, if you're coming with this, if one is wedded to this picture, that there is something that is doing the controlling, there is someone who's in control, that's one way of thinking about it. But on the Buddhist picture, you know, and this is an open question. What do you think? What do you guys think? Can the Buddhists make sense? Is what I'm saying making sense? You know, you can control your mental states. So meditation is a way of controlling your mental states, so that the Buddhists will say, so that the positive feelings arise, so that jealousy, greed, those sorts of things, you know, don't arise. Rather, compassion, sympathy, you know, all the nice, love, etc., all the nice feelings arise, not the things. Anger is something that needs to be controlled. So, you know, you can learn processes to do that. When you say, no, but there must be, that's still not free will, that's just more causal states. The Buddha say, yes, that's all there is. I mean, the free will is presupposing that there is a person. There's someone in control. And that's the wrong picture. At the ultimate level, that's not the right picture. That's their view. I mean, like it or not. But that's their view. They're saying, yes, that's one way of thinking about it. But there, you're presupposing that there's an agent in control. The Buddhist has already said there is no agent of actions. There is no one on control. They're competing mental states. That's all there is. And, you know, there is control over the competing mental states in that you can inculcate more positive states and learn to suppress the more negative states. How do you tell which states are positive and which states are negative? Negative states cause distress, the Buddha says. You know, greed, anger, jealousy, they cause bodily distress. You know, you feel distressed when you are you know, you're very angry at someone. You feel agitated. And the Buddhists say, you know, and when you are feeling feelings of sympathy, feelings of empathy, feeling in love, all those are lovely states for the body. Why? Because that's how it naturally is. You need to stop suffering yourself, and you need to stop making others suffer, because you need to inculcate the habit of having more positive mental states arising, rather than letting negative states. I've started sounding like a Buddhist monk, haven't I? I should stop. Maybe we should have a break. I think I'm getting carried away. And then we'll come back to talking about what the Buddhist has to say about identity over time. But, you know, that was good discussion. Think there are lots and lots of issues that the Buddhists must account for. And it's an uphill battle, trying to really see if, you know, if even the Buddhist view makes sense. Most people just reject the Buddhist view out of hand and say, oh, I cannot make sense of life on this view. I think one can go a long way. Let me not say you can go the whole way. Maybe in the second part I will tell you where the Buddhist account is under pressure.